So, is Japan in the middle of a succession crisis? Well, let's quickly take a look at Japan's royal family and the royal tree, but it's worth bearing in mind that only male descendants, so sons through the male line, can claim Japan's chrysanthemum throne normally, so bear that in mind.
Now, you can see here the current royal family, including the current emperor Naruhito. Now, he only has a daughter, and he and his brother, Prince Fumihito, are the only sons of the former emperor Akihito. Now, the two sons, Fumihito and Naruhito, only had daughters up until 2006, and they can't inherit through Japan's male-only succession laws. And the former emperor Akihito's brother, Prince Itachi, also had no children. So, as you can imagine, before 2006, the situation was maybe a little bit tense, but the birth of Prince Hisahito, who's now the second in line, prevented a situation where there were no eligible sons in the future in the family to inherit. So as you can imagine, his birth was probably a large relief for the family, as up until then there were real concerns that the family could become extinct in the male line and have no eligible successors. But it also carried political implications, as until then there were serious discussions about reforming Japan's succession laws to preserve the institution of emperor. Which possibly would have allowed women to inherit and to prevent, a possible ending of the royal line and to secure the institution of the Emperor of Japan. Now, with the birth of the prince, those discussions largely slowed down, but not entirely stopped. And arguably, this has put a lot of pressure on the prince as well, as it's still a precarious situation. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so there's not that many male heirs in the current generation of the royal family, but surely given the length of time that Japan's royal family have reigned, you could go back a few generations and you must find some male relatives in the male line. Well, surprisingly, not really, no. I've looked into this and even went back to Emperor Meiji, who's famous for restoring the family to power. Now, Emperor Meiji was born in 1852. He had 13 children, but of those, only one son survived to adulthood. Then that was the Emperor Taisho. Now, he had 4 sons. His first and eldest became the Emperor Showa, but his second and third son had no children, whereas his fourth son did have 2 daughters and 3 sons, but none of them had male heirs, sons of their own. So that brings us then to his first son, the Emperor Showa. Now, he had children, 2 of them being sons, which pretty much brings us to the present day and the current situation with the royal family, where Prince Hisahito is his only grandson. So it's kind of unfortunate that from the point of view of the royal family, the immediate family simply hasn't had that many male heirs eligible for succession, despite, in general, the family having a large surviving family, but they're simply not eligible to inherit, as there's not that many male heirs.
Now, you might be asking at this point, why consider this at all? How can you consider this a current political issue? Well, I would say it is a current political issue simply because it's widely discussed and it divides political opinion. As I said, before the birth of Prince Hisahito in 2006, there was serious discussions about whether to reform the succession in Japan, to modernise it and to allow women to possibly succeed, to strengthen and secure the dynasty of Japan. Now, despite Prince Hisahito's birth, that discussion still continues, and it's an issue where people continue to have a political position. For example, the current head of the LDP and possible future Prime Minister, Seinai Takeichi, is more of a traditionalist. She doesn't want to reform the succession laws in Japan. She wants to continue with the long-going tradition of son-to-son succession, which goes back into Japan's very early history, and she wants to avoid any reform of that and sort of stick with tradition. In contrast to that, there are politicians who agree with her, who also have that traditionalist view, but there are also politicians who favour reform in some aspect to sort of modernise or secure the succession of Japan. It also still generates discussion, given the rather precarious position where it's putting all this pressure on one person to secure the future of Japan's family dynasty. And also it's a question of whether to modernise or not. Now, one example of that is that the Yomiuri Shimbun, a major newspaper in Japan and considered a conservative one as well, rather surprised people by openly calling for reform in an opinion piece in May 2025. And saying that there should be reform to the succession laws of Japan seriously considered in order to secure the succession in Japan. And that's incredibly surprising that they would come out and say that, and it's garnered a fair bit of conversation. So that's just yet another example of how this question is currently generating speculation and dividing political opinion and creating discussion. Now, I've already covered the extent of how far this back goes in the royal family, of lack of male heirs being born into the family of Japan. However, there were cadet branches of the Japanese family which were running counter to the current royal family and were considered eligible for succession. Now, these were cadet branches of the family which went back for quite some time. However, when the American occupation and the reform of Japan's constitution happened in the 1940s, one of the consequences of that was the sort of ending of the aristocracy in Japan, and one consequence of that was to effectively delegitimize or end these cadet branches and remove them from the line of succession and just have the very focused royal family. Now, because of this accident of not many men being born into the current royal family and them effectively being trimmed and removed from the potential royal succession, we're now in this sort of very stark situation where we're looking at only one eventual male heir to the line of Japan, and things looking very precarious, which, as I say, is generating current conversation. It's generating concerns about whether the royal family will continue. It's putting a lot of pressure on only one person, and it's creating it into a political issue as well. Now, the way I see it, there are only three obvious paths you can take to sort of address this situation. One, and I think this is probably the most likely unless something changes politically in Japan, is the status quo, and to simply hope that the situation resolves itself in time and it works out. That's the default and what's happening right now, really, and just hope that the situation changes over time. The second path would be to have some sort of reform to allow female succession within Japan. This is what seriously was under consideration. Now, it would be interesting how this might be handled. It could possibly be, if it was introduced, this reform, to have succession similar to how it works in the UK now, where you ignore whether a potential heir is male or female, and you simply allow the eldest child of the current monarch to succeed and ignore sort of sex in that respect. Or it could be what you had in the UK and in other countries in the past, which would be to say that you allow, you primarily have male succession, and so you'll always prefer a male heir, even if it's a younger child. But in situations where there's no male heir available, the female child of a current monarch might be considered the next in line for succession, and then through them their sons would be the next in line if they had any. Now, if you pursued this option, and the option that was under serious consideration in the past in Japan, depending on how it was handled, it might upset traditionalists, of course. But it has the advantage, the upside, that it keeps the royal family going, it secures the line of succession, adds instantly lots of additional potential heirs, and it also keeps the royal family's succession within the current royal family, the one who everyone knows, the one who everyone's familiar with, and the one who everyone considers the royal family and expects might succeed to the chrysanthemum throne at some point. Even if they might not be expecting daughters to succeed, they are at least part of the current royal family who everyone knows and has been sort of brought up in that environment where they're sort of expecting this responsibility and to step up and potentially take those duties. And in the past, there was, before the birth of the prince in 2006, there was some degree of readiness for this, that this might be an eventuality. The third path would be a wild card option, but still potentially you could consider it the traditionalist one, which would be to simply restore the cadet branches that existed before the 1940s and the reforms of Japan and the constitutional changes, and to simply say those cadet branches that were formerly considered royal, descended directly from previous emperors, those are once again considered cadet branches of the royal family. They're now legitimized again, and they will be considered in the line of succession. Now, this would instantly add potential successors via male son to male son into the line of Japan's succession, and would secure it by adding additional heirs, but it's not without problems, despite it following that sort of traditionalist line. One, there's the controversy associated with unwrapping any of the sort of the post-World War II reforms, which would be seen as sort of very potentially controversial and sort of winding back the clock to sort of the modernisation of Japan and the changes made at that time. And so it might be seen as controversial, as I say, to unwrap any of those as sort of modernisation changes that the US made when they modernised Japan and changed its constitution. And it might be seen as sort of turning the clock back into sort of the pre-World War II situation in Japan. Two, it makes royals retroactively out of what are now ordinary citizens who would not be expecting this, who the public doesn't know, and who were entirely at this moment unprepared for this and will not have been considered that they might be potential successors to the Japanese throne. And as I say, simply they're unknown to the public at large and they're not considered currently part of the royal family. On a baseline, you'd have to consider that at the very least, from a practical point of view, you'd have to approach these cadet branches and get their consent for this if they were to be considered serious potential successors in the eventuality that this happens. And thirdly, it creates the issue of an entirely unknown person to the public at large, outside of the current royal family, becoming the Emperor of Japan, which would be very unexpected. It would be quite a surprise for the Japanese public at large, and it would take, if this were to happen, some time to adjust to. And it would sort of maybe be quite controversial that sort of unknown male successors might become the emperors of Japan over the female members who are considered closer to what are considered now the primary royal family, the actual royal family, if you will, and that they would be effectively, you'd be passing over daughters of that family to allow these unknown successors to come in and claim the throne of Japan. Even though it would sort of preserve the tradition of Japan and not upset traditionalists, and it would instantly, at a moment's notice, add successors to Japan. So those are some of the reasons why Japan arguably has a succession crisis, where it's all sort of very much depending on one person, and those are some of the options, all of which have some degree of advantages, disadvantages, controversy, but those are some of the paths that could be considered to maybe address this and maybe add a bit of security to the succession of Japan. But as I say, I largely expect that for some time, unless something politically changes, the status quo will continue on, and simply Japan will hope that this situation will just quietly resolve itself in time. But we'll wait to see if that's the case.